During the breakup of the British Empire in the 1960s, as factions of its former realm sought to create new independent nations, frictions between these various states and their neighbours rapidly came to the fore, one of the more notable being the North Borneo Confrontation of 1963 to 1966, wherein a series of border skirmishes fought in the dense jungle between the nations of Malaysia and Indonesia saw British troops fighting in some of the most inhospitable conditions ever encountered in the field, essentially a taste of what would later be experienced by American troops in the Vietnam War towards the end of the same decade. The Borneo Confrontation was owed to a general political instability in the region of Southeast Asia that was mainly caused by Indonesia and its revolutionary first president following independence from the Netherlands, Sukarno, who sought to create a foreign policy that was focused on the acquisition of Netherlands New Guinea as a residual issue from the Indonesian National Revolution of 1949, thus cementing Indonesia as the pivotal power of the region that could seek aid from both the capitalist and communist factions of the wider Cold War. Attempts to press home the matter by Sukarno between 1950 and 1962 facing stiff opposition from the UN General Assembly, who did not recognize Indonesia's claim, while further setting back Sukarno's plans was the Indonesian crisis of 1958, during which the Pemesta rebellion of eastern Indonesia and the establishment of a new rebel revolutionary government in Sumatra threatened to break the country into pieces. In 1962, tensions reached a head when Indonesia launched a major aerial and naval campaign against Netherlands New Guinea, but these were routed by Dutch and indigenous defenders, though subsequent to Sukarno's failure to take the country by force, the Dutch colonizers were ultimately forced to agree a diplomatic compromise at the insistence of the Americans, who wished not to see Indonesia turn to the Soviet Union and Red China as allies, and thus turn the country into a communist faction in Southeast Asia alongside North Vietnam, the terms of the compromise being that Indonesia would be allowed to gain control of the territory in exchange for pledging to hold a self-determination plebiscite in the country by 1969, seeing Sukarno achieve a major diplomatic victory over the colonial Dutch, and thus giving him the impetus to mount further land acquisition campaigns against the neighbouring British colonies. During the late 1950s, the British, under severe economic pressure, had gradually seen their colonies in Southeast Asia be granted independence, with the Federation of Malaya leaving the empire in 1957, followed by Singapore becoming a self-governing country in 1959, the British and Malayan governments, in May 1961, drafting a proposal to create a larger federation of states known as Malaysia, which would encompass Malaya, North Borneo, Sarawak, the Sultanate of Brunei, and Singapore, with Indonesia being tentatively accepting of the scheme, while Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III's support of the proposal was ambiguous, as it implied a potential reduction in his political office, while joining the federation was not essential due to the Sultanate's own substantial oil revenues, allowing for an economically sustainable independent nation. The matter of joining Malaysia being one of great contention within the ranks of the Brunei government, with political figures either supporting an alliance with the neighbouring North Borneo or with the larger Indonesia. Matters came to a head on December 8, 1962, when forces of the North Kalimantan National Army staged a wholly unsuccessful insurrection that attempted to topple the Sultan during what was known as the Brunei Revolt, where rebel factions failed to achieve any of their objectives of capturing the Sultan, seizing the oil fields, or taking Europeans hostage. The British, fearing the revolt as a possible prelude to an Indonesian invasion, mustering forces based in Singapore and having them on the ground in Brunei within 30 hours of the insurrection commencing, with Gurkha troops being sent straight to the Sultan's palace in order to provide a personal guard, Indonesia initially declaring that they had not provided any support to the revolt, but later changed their stance on January 20, 1963, by announcing that they were now opposed to the British proposal for establishing the Federation of Malaysia, followed on April 12 by Indonesian armed forces staging their first infiltrations when the police station in Tebedu, Sarawak, was assaulted. Alongside the Indonesian intrusions, Sarawak itself was rife with communist sympathies as a means of uniting the entire of Borneo under a left-wing banner, with the Sarawak Communist Organisation, which was primarily dominated by ethnic Chinese, hosting 24,000 members who preached the ideologies of Chinese Maoism, the SCO, together with the Brunei rebels from the 1962 revolt, retreating to Kalimantan in the south and joining the Indonesians, attempts being made on July 30, 1963, to resolve the dispute between would-be member states of the Malaysian Federation, together with Indonesia and the Philippines, the latter of whom also staked a claim for East Borneo due to historic connections between the two countries, Sukarno continuing to declare his opposition to the Federation, while the Philippines would only be supportive of the scheme if North Borneo and Sarawak were allowed a UN-organised referendum on the formation of Malaysia, the two countries declaring independence on August 31, 1963, and joining the Federation before the results of the UN referendum were published on September 14th, with Malaysia being formally established 2 days later, leading to a swathe of anti-Malaysian violence across Indonesia that saw the Malaysian ambassador expelled, while rioters burned the British and Singapore embassies in Jakarta. Throughout August 1963, even as resolutions continued to be discussed between the British, Malaysians, Indonesians and the UN, Indonesian incursions into North Borneo and Sarawak continued, with firefights occurring between the Indonesian army and Gurkha divisions assigned to patrol the borderlands, the island of Borneo, at the time, being divided into 4 states: Kalimantan, which comprised 4 Indonesian provinces, the Sultanate of Brunei, which was a British protectorate, and the British Crown colonies of Sarawak and North Borneo, 3 states under UK administration, boasting a population of 1.5 million people, and comprise some of the harshest environmental conditions ever to be encountered in the field of battle, being only 100 miles north of the equator, and thereby presenting dense tropical rainforest, of which much had not been explored, with very few roads and little accurate mapping to illustrate what the situation was on the ground, while North Borneo receives over 118 inches of rainfall per annum, thus making it one of the wettest places on Earth. All these factors combined, together with the primarily mountainous terrain, resulting in a logistical nightmare for both sides in any conflict, as ground transportation was rendered near impossible, thus relying heavily on narrow air corridors that could be easily interdicted. With the establishment of Malaysia, and Borneo now declared as East Malaysia, units from the Malaysian army were sent to support the Gurkha regiments on border patrol, with skirmishes continuing with the Indonesians throughout the remainder of 1963 and into 1964, when, on August 17, 1964, or Indonesian Independence Day, Sukarno sent a seaborne force of 100 commandos to infiltrate the Malaysian peninsula, though all but 4 of these troops were captured by the Commonwealth forces when their expected support from Malaysia failed to materialize, this being followed on September 2 by Indonesian Lockheed C-130 Hercules transport aircraft being deployed from Jakarta to dispatch paratroops to the north of Singapore, with one of these being shot down over the Straits of Malacca by an RAF Gloucester Javelin interceptor, though of the 96 paratroops successfully dropped, Gurkha regiments, together with the 1st Battalion, the Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment, were able to capture or kill 90 of the paratroopers at the expense of only 2 casualties. In response, the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious and its 2 destroyer escorts were dispatched to the Sunda Straits, with aircraft aboard the Victorious, including Supermarine Scimitar strike aircraft, being readied for low-level attack missions using guns only against Indonesian staging areas for future possible infiltration missions, a 3-week standoff ensuing that was eventually resolved peacefully, while in the wider confrontation, a stalemate appeared to have been reached between the Commonwealth and Indonesian factions by the end of 1964, though in December of that year, British military intelligence reported a massive buildup of Indonesian forces in the Kalimantan region that seemed poised to strike into Sarawak, leading to 2 British battalions being transferred to the borderlands of North Borneo to act as a defensive force, with Australia and New Zealand agreeing to provide their own combat troops to the operational theatre from early 1965. Counter to Indonesian infiltrations against North Borneo and Sarawak, the Commonwealth troops also mounted their own cross-border missions into Indonesia under what was known as Operation Claret, mostly led by Special Forces units from the British Special Air Service, the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, and the New Zealand Special Air Service, these commencing from May 1965 and operated under extremely classified conditions, with small recon teams crossing the border into Kalimantan so as to detect any build-ups of Indonesian military factions, and was originally limited to only 3,000 yards penetration, though this was increased to 10,000 yards following the Battle of Plaman Mapu during April of the same year, when a crack battalion of 400 Indonesian soldiers launched a surprise attack on B Company 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment in their base at Palman Mapu, which comprised only 35 men, though despite being outnumbered 5-1, the British, under the command of Sergeant Major John Williams, successfully fought off wave after wave of Indonesian troops for 2 hours before being relieved by reinforcements delivered to the battlefield by helicopter. Under Operation Claret, Special Force recon units would scout out Indonesian positions before being followed by regular infantry who would ambush and destroy these factions, either as they crossed the border into North Borneo or while they were still in Kalimantan. These operations, as mentioned, being undertaken with extreme secrecy due to their infringement on Indonesian sovereignty, and were conducted in a manner that gave plausible deniability to the British state should these operations be uncovered by the Indonesian government, Operation Claret being hugely successful to the Commonwealth side in that it inflicted huge casualties on the Indonesian factions while providing a strong and consistent defence of the borderlands, the British government not publicly disclosing the details of Operation Claret until 1974, while the Australians denied involvement until 1996. By mid-1965, it appeared that support for Sukarno had waned rapidly due to his inability to repeat success against the Dutch when fighting the British in North Borneo, and thus on September 30, 1965, an attempted coup took place in Jakarta, led by 7 senior military figures in the Indonesian army, 6 of whom were captured and put to death, while the 7th narrowly escaped with his life, Sukarno allocating responsibility for the coup on Indonesian communist factions, thus leading to an extremely bloody period of arrests and lynching across the country that amounted to over 1 million deaths. Major General Suharto, commander of the Military Strategic Reserve Command, taking control of the Indonesian army from October 1, 1965, and used this as a means of consolidating his own power while undermining that of Sukarno, all while infiltrations by Indonesian troops into North Borneo began to ease, but did not stop completely, with a Commonwealth tripwire force remaining in the borderlands and recon missions under Operation Claret being maintained. In March 1966, the fiercest fighting during the conflict took place, when a Gurkha battalion undertook their own raids into Kalimantan, though this was followed on May 28 by a summit being held in Bangkok, wherein the Malaysian and Indonesian governments declared an end to the Borneo Confrontation, though the British demanded that their tripwire force remain vigilant in the face of any possible bluffs by the wily Suharto, a peace treaty being ultimately signed on August 11, 1966, and was ratified 2 days later. The Borneo Confrontation having seen 17,000 Commonwealth and 10,000 Malayan forces deployed to the borderlands, of which 607 were killed and 180 were wounded, against 590 killed on the Indonesian side, a majority of those killed on the defending side being Malaysian military police and border scouts, while of the Commonwealth factions, 43 Gurkhas, 19 British, 16 Australians and 7 New Zealanders were killed during the confrontation, many of whom were lost in helicopter accidents deep in the thick jungle, the worst being on May 4, 1963, when Bristol Belvedere HC-1, X-ray Golf 473, crashed in the Trusan River Valley while transporting a contingent of SAS troops to the front line as part of Operation Claret, killing all 9 aboard, including a member of the UK Foreign Office who was suspected of being an MI5 agent. In the wake of the Borneo Confrontation, Suharto, having secured an armistice with the Malaysians, moved quickly to build his political base within the Indonesian government that culminated in his forming of a new administration in March 1968 that excluded Sukarno, thus allowing him to rise to the presidency and rule Indonesia for the next 30 years, while subsequently seeing nothing to gain from pursuing annexation of North Borneo, as he considered the expense of military forces in attempting to capture the nation as greatly outweighing any potential advantages it may have allowed for, while on the Malaysian side, the performance of the Commonwealth factions in mustering a suitable defence force was considered one of the most efficient uses of military force in modern history, with several members of the Commonwealth factions receiving awards and citations, the most notable of which was Rambahadur Limbu of the 2nd Battalion 10th Princess Mary's Own Gurkha Rifles of the British Army, who received a Victoria Cross for gallantry when his party of 16 Gurkhas encountered an Indonesian machine gun emplacement on November 21, 1965, during which Lance Corporal Limbu rushed forward under heavy fire and destroyed the emplacement with a grenade, before rescuing 2 injured members of his company while still under enemy fire. In the end, the Borneo Confrontation not only illustrated the successful ability of the British and Malaysian forces in mustering a suitable defence against Indonesian aggression within a short space of time, but also demonstrated a superb example of jungle combat when fighting an undeclared war, with both the British and Indonesians poised along the borderlands of North Borneo, but neither one able to mount a full-scale invasion of the other's territory without inviting severe tactical or political consequences, while the British employment of clandestine tactics such as Operation Claret meant any attempted raids by the Indonesian factions could be easily prepared for, and thus led essentially to a prolonged stalemate that saw an ultimately peaceful resolution.